Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, I watch the interwebs like you guys do, and I watch the gun tubers. And Tim from Military Arms Channel was talking about the most influential rifles of today. And it made me think about, that's kind of partially correct. He shows off the ACR, and if you don't know what the ACR, look it up. It was interesting, and it was a gun concept that had a lot of modern backing in other rifles nowadays. And it made me think about something I've talked about on this podcast before, but legacy stuff. And there's certain legacy guns that I think we see the influence even now. That's what I honestly thought Tim was going to talk about. You know, if you look at any of the modern pistols, Glock, M&P, you are looking at a direct descendant of John Browning's 1911 design. One way or another, it has 1911 design. How it does that is because the barrel, as the slide comes back, the barrel unlocks and kind of pivots down and allows for the extraction of the spent cartridge and loads up. Now, if you've looked at or taken apart any of your pistols, you know that's the case. Just like my favorite rifle of all time isn't a Kalashnikov. It's actually a K98 Mauser. But if you look at the influence there, and the Remington Model 700 and the Winchester Model 70s, and you look even now in today's modern bad boy bolt-action rifles like the Bergeras, and you're seeing influence from Mauser. You're seeing the same locking surfaces, the same bolt angles, believe it or not, that you saw with that gun. So its legacy still lives on. And if you look at all the guns in world history, throughout the world, you see that all the time. And that's what's been so interesting to me with the 2A, is seeing those legacy pieces. As much as I'm a fan of the Kalashnikov, that the Kalashnikov was very much influenced by the designer of the Sturmgewehr, the STG-44. Now, they have different operating principles. One of them, I think the STG-44 is basically, I don't know if it's a long stroke or a short stroke gas piston, to be honest. I've never seen one torn apart. But its layout is what was copied more so than anything by Kalashnikov. And Kalashnikov making the long stroke gas piston, that you can even look at and see influence from the M1 Garand. How gas is tapped off from the barrel and causes a piston to come back one way or another and cycle the action. That's from the M1. And you look at these pieces, what are the most influential rifles throughout world history? I would say those two, the Sturmgewehr is probably the biggest one in modern firearms parlance, because it brought in the intermediate cartridge, and it brought out pretty much the layout or the ergonomics that we're used to. Now, the ergonomics got more refined with something like the AR-15 for Western shooters, and the AR-15 is one of those guns I would consider a huge influence now. That's why they all look the same. The modern sporting rifles look a lot like AR-15s. And while Tim was talking about the stock of the ACR and the basic layout of the SCAR and how all those influence newer modern rifles, all those have a legacy, and I'm sure Tim would agree with this if he ever hears this, back to other guns, And that's what made me start thinking about what other guns in history or throughout what we know in the 2A are legacy, that have brought things forward, either one design aspect or multiple design aspects to the modern guns that we're using now. One of the things that I think we did better in the modern parlance is we put a receiver on a bolt action that has a piece of Picatinny on it, and that allows us to add optics, and that makes the gun 1,000 times more effective, in my opinion. Being an older guy, having optics is no longer a nicety. It's something I have to do. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. And while I can still shoot irons and still shoot them fairly proficiently, I prefer optics except for in pistols. Pistols, I've talked about that. I see what they're trying to do with the red dots, but the problem I have with them is, it'd have to come through training with me, shooting thousands of rounds to do it, is that I chase the red dot. Now, I don't do that with a rifle, but the red dot blooms because I have astigmatism. You look at muzzle devices on guns. The first rifles that had muzzle devices were military rifles, and they were made to suppress the flash, so that you could shoot them in lower light conditions without being blinded by the giant ball of flame coming out the front of them. Then we realized that if you cut those notches or drill those notches a little different, you actually cut that blast wave and allow recoil to be mitigated somewhat. It's those little pieces, those little jumps in technology. The cartridge, the metal cartridge itself. I talked about this before, and I've had it on Rumble. I have a little thing there I go about the advancement of firearms. And for me, when I look at the guns that seem to be the most influential in the world to me, I'm looking at them from that perspective. I'm looking at what design cues changed so dramatically throughout the years that made modern guns what they are. The detachable box magazine, something that the Germans started, but it was actually started by the British, if you look at it from where I'm coming from. Ian from Forgotten Weapons probably can tell you exactly where it came from. But the first rifle I ever saw with a detached box magazine was an actual British Enfield, a 303 Brit. And you can take that 10-round box magazine out. That's not how they used them. They topped them off with stripper clips. Let's talk about stripper clips. Stripper clips, how many of the older guns like the Mauser, like that, the 303 British, or like the garbage rod Mosin Nagant, they use stripper clips. That's what led us to load the guns faster. Then you see the evolution of that in the G43, my dream gun, where it had detachable box magazines, but it still had the stripper clip places to put to use stripper clips. I probably wouldn't do that because I'm sure that would give you a righteous M1 Garand thumb, wicked worse than the M1 Garand, just because the springs are under a hell of a lot more tension. But then you look at the STG-44, where you actually had a 30-round or a 33-round box mag that was detachable. And then I go back to the AR-15. The AR-15 is the first American rifle that it was originally designed as the magazines would be totally disposable. Now, that didn't work out because some bean counters got involved and realized that why are you throwing away something that can be reused? The M14 had box detachable magazines too, but they weren't designed to be thrown away. And you still could use stripper clips, believe it or not, in that. In the first iterations of the T14 when it came out, which is the M14, they had places for you to reload it with stripper clips. It wasn't uncommon to think that you would be handed in the military circles stripper clips, and that's what you'd carry in the field with maybe 5 magazines, maybe 3 magazines. It wasn't until later that we realized that you're a lot more effective and you don't really have a chance to reload. Kalashnikov took that even farther. Then you look at today's drum mags that have been around. The design has been around since the Luger. The Luger was the first one with a snail drum mag for pistols that I know of. And then the evolution of the drum into the Thompson and into the PPSH, Peppershaw. Everything that's old, or everything that's new is old, or everything that is old is new again. That's the best way to put that. You look at this stuff, the evolution and the most influential things, it is, you're at a point where there's a stock of some kind at the butt in modern circles They're adjustable for length of pull for different sizes of shooters, or if you're wearing body armor because you need to do so professionally or whatever. Then you start looking at, there's a pistol grip of some kind, even on bolt actions now. And why are they doing that? Because of ergonomics. It's to make the gun fit the shooter. You know, as the evolution of firearms design entered its zenith, I think that actually happened in the 60s and 70s, you started seeing what we're seeing as modern guns. You go into the new stuff you're seeing, it's mostly material sciences. They're changing the metal from, solid steel cut stuff that you'd have to mill because of its weight and because of its cost to aluminum T75, T7075, I think is what it is for the AR-15. But that same AR-15 steel, or not steel, aluminum has been used in uppers now, in monolithic uppers. And it's because material science has evolved. Same thing with polymers. Polymers are what they've done nowadays to take old designs or older designs, update them, and make them lighter. If you look at the SCAR, it is a short-stroke gas piston. The short-stroke gas piston's been around as long as the SKS. The SKS is the first one I know that had a short-stroke gas piston. Again, I'm not Ian from Forgotten Weapons. I just pay attention to what I've seen in my life. I'm sure there were other ones. M1 Grand kind of fits that bill too. But you look at that stuff and you see that evolutions of designs. The M1 Grand is one of those actions I think influenced a lot of things. The M1 Grand, the M14, the M1 Carbine, the Mini 14 are all based on the same design that John Garand perfected. Like I said, you can't look at a modern pistol, except for the CZ75, which isn't a John Browning design. But it has a lot of the notes, the grips, where the mag releases are, where the safety goes. A lot of these are denoted because of, like I said, ergonomics, where people's fingers are and where their hands go and where you're going to have to set your face on the gun. But a lot of them are designed around what made sense and what worked. A lot of people look at something like in World War II, the Bren gun, and it had a top-loading magazine. And there were machine guns from Czechoslovakia that did the same thing. I think they're called Madison or something like that. And you think about that, why aren't they still around? Because it's not convenient. Where do you put your sights? They had to offset the sights so you could shoot around the magazine. And that isn't really conducive to what we found later. If you look at the first AR-15s, they were loaded with 20-round magazines, and the reason why is they wanted you to be able to get low as possible when you were shooting them, in the prone. Then after facing off the Kalashnikov, they made them bigger. They made them curved. And you're going to have to sit up higher when you're shooting those, usually. But you look at these design cues. My favorite one is the long stroke gas piston, the Kalashnikov. Why? Because it is less maintenance intensive than the AR-15. But if you talk to other people, especially American shooters, you find the AR-15 is their preferred gun. And why? There's a military provenance with that. Any gun that's used by a military usually gains some ground in American shooting world because they like the fact that it's proven good enough for the military. The AR-15 or the M16, I should say, because it's not the same, is the longest serving military rifle we've ever had. And why is that? Because it fits the bill, it does what it's supposed to, and its design cues allows it to be modular enough to be updated and modernized as needed. For a lot of people, that's enough. What I think is hilarious is you see all those modernization cues that we've done with the AR-15 being pushed into like the AK-12. And they're doing a poor job because, well, they don't have our industrial complex to do it. But they're also doing a poor job because they're not thinking like us. Modularity allows you to upgrade a rifle on the fly if you need to. You can have your red dot zeroed with a quick detach mount, put it in a bag, and if you know where the markings are, the T markings on the top of a Picatinny rail, you could swap it out for an optic that'll give you longer range or a lot more magnification. Same thing goes for the front of the gun. You could zero your red dot or your D-ball or your PEC 14 and take it off the gun so you don't have to sling that weight all the time, and once you need it, you can clip it back on and you should be back to where you were for factory zero. There was a point in time that didn't happen. And as guns evolved, you saw HK was one of those companies that was thinking ahead, and they were starting to use different ways of mounting gun accessories. And then the Americans made it better. First thing we had was, what the hell is it called? I forget. It's now evolved to M-Lock. That's how inconsequential it was to me. Keymod, there we go. So Keymod was the version of before M-Lock, and then people found out that Keymod tended to lose accessories. You needed to tighten them down really hard before they would stay there. Where M-Lock kind of holds at zero, and you can put a rail there, or you can put the accessory there and tighten it down, and it doesn't go anywhere. Specifically, if you're running in the field, that's what they found in the military. All these design cues or these design elements come from military usually, or from the military, and then we enhance them and make them better because of the civilian market. Optics, I think, are a prime example. If you look at military optics up until recently, they were playing catch up to what we had in the civilian world. And why is that? Because the free market provides. The same thing happens with everything in the 2A. But if I was going to pick the most influential guns, to get back to that, I would say it would be John Browning's 1911. And I'm going to preface this. Let me give this way. If I was going to say guns that influenced modern design, modern rifles, this is where I'm going. It'd be the 1911, of course. And then I would honestly say the Mauser for anything that's a bolt action. Anything you look at at modern rifle, modern hunting rifle, compare it to a Mauser, you'll see the design cues there. They may not be the exact same thing, but you'll see that this was inspired by that. Definitely copying the homework, so to speak. I would say the AR-15 and the M16 are probably the ones that are the most influential now. And the reason why is how many different derivatives of the AR-15 do you see on the modern market? Same thing with the AR-10. And as far as the Kalashnikov, well, you cannot tell me that 100 million copies around the world or more, and that's what there probably are, haven't influenced guns at all. If you look at the FNFAL or the G3, I would consider those influential rifles too, but their designs are older and they're not still influencing what we see now. Maybe the FAL, maybe a little bit, but you're not seeing roller delay guns except for the new little Strybog 9mm, which is a roller, but it's a different roller lock design. You're seeing these classic operating systems being improved, lightened, materials are changed, but the basic guts of what they are, the basic design, hasn't changed. And that, to me, is what I've always loved about the 2A. As much as I bitch about not seeing new innovation, I like seeing the old stuff being brought back to the new. Like, share, subscribe, be great.